Welcome to Jazz Zone Together. Today, we are thrilled to welcome one of the world's leading advocates of jazz and jazz education to our Zoom stage, Dr. Gene Aitken. The University of Northern Colorado Vocal Jazz Ensemble 1, under the direction of Dr. Gene, is the only institution of higher education ever to win the coveted Grammy Award. Today, Dr. Gene continues to have an incredible impact around the globe in enhancing the role of jazz in the world of music. He currently resides in Taipei, Taiwan, directing the Taipei Jazz Orchestra, as well as being the CEO of one of the most exciting nonprofit jazz publishing companies in the world, ijazzmusic.com. In addition, Gene is also CEO of Jazz Education Abroad, an international nonprofit jazz organization presenting live and online workshops in Europe, Asia, South America, and the Middle East. Now, I'd like to turn the mic over to Dick Dunscomb to conduct the interview with Gene. Dick, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. That's quite an introduction on quite a fantastic man. Gene, it's so good to see you, man.
Well, thank you very much, Dick. Good to see you.
We have a lot to talk about, and I know that we're going to get into where you are and what you're doing currently. But first, I'd like to go back to the beginning of your musical career when you were a young boy. How did that begin, and how did you follow this path to music?
Well, Dick, I grew up in the Seattle area in a town called Renton, Washington. And in Renton, Washington, it had probably one of the better music programs in the Northwest. But at that time, you could go from Seattle down to Kent, down to Auburn, to Puyallup, Sumner, Tacoma, etc., and you would find all kinds of great wind ensemble band programs. So that was really a time in which the arts and the band and so forth were really flourished around the Seattle area. They had concert band competitions, they had solo and ensemble contests, all kinds of things for students to be involved in with the band program. And we were quite fortunate in the sense that the Seattle Symphony members would come out to Renton High School once a week, and they would give private lessons to the students in the band program. So which again was great. And another thing about Renton, Washington was it was the home of Raymond Fussell, who wrote this book called Ensemble Drill by Raymond Fussell. And I remember growing up on it, and I was going, oh no, not the Fussell book again. But it was a basic foundation. And so in our school at Renton High School, we participated in orchestra, we were in jazz band, we were in marching band. And the thing that was really interesting about the program at Renton, Washington, is that the director, Randy Rockhill, kept the music program open, or the music building open after school until 6 o'clock night, so we could sit around and practice, or we could go play basketball or do something else. And so as a foundation, we had a good concert band program. The people who were really good playing concert band, they played the orchestra. And we also had in the curriculum dance band, because that's what all those bands were. Count Basie and Duke Ellington, they were dance bands. So that when we wanted to hear these big bands, we would go to Seattle and we would find Duke Ellington as a dance event at the Trianon Ballroom or something like that. So that's the way we heard the big bands. So that was very interesting. And there was another thing that happened in my career that I think was really important. And that was when I was a junior in high school, I joined the National Guard band. because at that time, you either had to go 8 years of reserve or 2 years of active duty. So I thought, well, if I start in my junior year in high school, when I get out, I'll only have 6 more years left. But when I joined the National Guard band, it was something I had never expected, because in the band were people like Floyd Stanifer, Al Pace, Quincy Jones had just left the band. So the band, the National Guard band, had all these great jazz artists in the band. And in addition to that, they had the top line Selmer saxophones and Bach trumpets and trombones, Fox bassoons and oboes. So we could check out any of the instruments that we wanted to play, and or if we didn't have a good instrument of our own, we were allowed to use the National Guard band. So in the National Guard, I wound up staying about 42 years in the National Guard band and retired. After I got to Colorado, I was still, when I went to the University of Northern Colorado, I was still in the National Guard band. So it was really an interesting time. I think the opportunities at that time, if you were really interested in music and you went to solo ensemble contests and band competitions, you got all of that, all of those kinds of feedback from adjudicators, from other teachers, and so forth. And I remember is in my junior and senior year in high school, I was playing in the Seattle Philharmonic Orchestra, and then since ballrooms were everywhere, I was playing in a big band, Johnny Schulten's big band, at the Rainbow Ballroom every Saturday night, and I was still in high school. So it was a great time to be in high school, and then other things led to other things, and I graduated from high school and then became pretty active in the Seattle area as a performer, not as an educator, as a performer. I did try to go to the University of Washington, and I was there one quarter, and I just flunked out. I just could not do the school, so I wound up for maybe the next 6-7 years just playing professional in Seattle. So that's kind of what happened at the very, very, very beginning. And then other things happened along the way with other things as far as professional playing. So that was great.
That's very cool. What an interesting experience to have there.
Right.
You know, one of the things that Bob alluded to in the beginning was your time at Northern Colorado. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I can remember that band and the vocal groups in there being just incredible. How did you do it? How did you keep it at that level?
Well, I think the key for me, and I would say the same thing today if I were in teaching, was that we had great teachers. Buddy Baker was teaching trombone. Bill Fund was teaching trumpet. Roger Greenberg, saxophone. Gray Barrier, percussion. Jim Vaughn, bass, and various piano teachers. But they were all teaching classical music. They were teaching the students how to play their instruments. So they had a solid base and a good grasp of the fundamentals of playing the instruments. We were fortunate in the sense that there was only myself full-time and Sandy Scott, who was the assistant jazz studies program for all those years. The key was the teaching assistants. So there were several events that led up to this, but eventually when I went to UNC, I had a couple of teaching assistants that would help me direct Lab Band 2 and Lab Band 3. There were 3 bands at the time. As the program grew, the institution allowed us to hire teaching assistants. So there were there was Buddy Baker, Bill Fund, Roger Greenberg, Gray Barrier, and so forth, all those people. But then we had 17 teaching assistants teaching the jazz improvisation, teaching the combos. So the teaching assistants that came were people like Bob Washington and so forth, were great musicians, were great jazz educators, great teachers. So the teaching assistants got really hands-on teaching experience, which helped the jazz program really grow through the years. So there were never when I was there were never really any full-time jazz teachers. They were all teaching assistants, and so that was really a very unique and a very wonderful experience, because then those teachers would rotate. They would come to UNC for a couple of years, and then through their jazz pedagogy class and other things that they do, they would apply for jobs, and they would get jobs, and then we'd rotate, and then there would be some other new folks that would come in to the program. I think that was the basic fundamental of the program. And I think there are a couple of things that were key in helping UNC grow within the jazz studies area. And one of those things was in 1976, when Downbeat decided to make student awards. Right away, we applied right away. And from the very beginning, just because there were very many applicants to do that, we were winning Downbeat awards at the very beginning. And then after about 5 or 6 years, we talked to Jamie Aebersold, and then the Jamie Aebersold summer jazz workshops were held at UNC. So people that we did not even know would come. And I remember Tim Walters and Bob Washington specifically were down and going to school in Arizona, but they went to the workshop and they came up to UNC and so forth. And so that was a sort of a recruiting tool, but that's how it worked. And then there was also the 1985 Grammy Award, which was very important. And then I think the real key was the UNC Greeley Jazz Festival, which became one of the largest jazz non-competitive festivals in the United States. And we had great jazz artists, we had great adjudicators. And so the name of the UNC Jazz Festival would bring all kinds of groups to UNC. They would hear the UNC groups and then say, oh, gee, I want to go to school there. So when you talk about, for a long time, that was really how the jazz program worked. But when they came, they would not come as a jazz major. They would come as an undergraduate trumpet major. In masters, they could do something in composite. Most of the jazz people were in composition. And at the doctorate, we finally later on got a secondary emphasis in jazz pedagogy. So then people came and worked on their doctorate degree. So
that's quite a model, Gene. And I'm telling you, I know, and a lot of other people know, it couldn't have happened without your leadership.
Well,
you have also had quite a commercial career recording vocal commercials in Seattle. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, after I initially didn't want to go to school and dropped out, I eventually went back to the University of Washington. The teacher I had was William Cole, who was the principal of trumpet in Seattle Symphony. And he said, with your experience, he said, you really should think about going into music education. And I thought, oh, maybe I should. So I eventually came back to University of Washington, and I thought I had some singing experience prior to that time, working with the accidentals and so forth. And I thought, I'll join choir. I think that would be kind of a great thing to do. And I was still playing professionally and so forth, but I thought joining the concert choir would be great. Well, in the concert choir, I met essentially about 7 other people, and we formed. I had heard the 4 freshmen, a recording of the 4 freshmen where they doubled their voices. And I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. So I thought, well, what if we have a vocal, we get out of Rod's choir, we have a vocal jazz quartet and we just double the parts. And so we tried that and it was really amazing. And at the time, there was a new company that formed in Seattle called JR Productions. And they were a commercial music organization. They had a full-time writer by the name of Frank Liberio. And then I applied and got the copyist job for the company. Well, one thing led to another, and here we were going to the studio. We called ourselves the Accidentals too, after the Accidentals group, because Bob Summers was writing for us at the time. So we began doing radio commercials for Ford magazine, for Ford cars, for U&I sugar, for everything we were doing. So we'd go into the studio, 10 o'clock in the morning. We'd get our parts, we gather around the mic that we had at the time, and we'd sing commercials in the studio. There would be the Seattle Symphony or some other smaller organization. And so we had a lot of really excellent commercial experience in the studios in Seattle. That just came out of just by chance. We were at the right place at the right time. And so I always credit Rod Eichenberg, because Rod was so encouraging to all of us at the time to get as much experience as we can, either in jazz or classical, but get a good foundation.
Wow. You've had so many different opportunities throughout your life, and you've made the best of every one of them. Let's talk for a second about the mid-'80s when you moved to Los Angeles to co-direct the Los Angeles Workshop Band with Bill Yeager. How did that come about?
Well, it's a long kind of story. I didn't really go out there. I knew of Bill. I'd heard of Bill Yeager, the LA Jazz Workshop Band. But I was going out to Los Angeles. It was my first sabbatical, which was in 1984 and 1985. I left to go out and because I wanted to go to Los Angeles. I was born in San Francisco. But I went out to Los Angeles with the idea of going to a recording engineering school, and which I did, and I attended that. And along the way, I had met Bill, and Bill Yeager grew up in Seattle, and he played in, I'm sure you remember, the Roosevelt High School Band was an amazing band. He was in the band at the time. He was at Roosevelt High School while I was going to the University of Washington. So we kind of connected, and one thing led to another, and I wound up working with playing in the number one band. We had 6 bands with the LA Jazz Workshop. Bill took, I think, the first band and the fourth band, and I directed the second and the other bands. But we had some of the greatest players in the world in the LA Jazz Workshop Band. Johnny Madrid was one of the world's greatest trumpet players, was playing. And so it was a wonderful, wonderful experience, and it got to be a very wonderful working relationship. And then finally, in the early '90s, what happened with the LA Jazz Workshop is that many of the studio players wound up playing in the Jazz Workshop, because when they would do movies, they would go beep, 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 and that was it, and they get paid their money and so forth. They didn't really get a chance to play. So they joined the LA Jazz Workshop. So by the 90s, we saw a great decrease in the number of musicians that were working in the studios in Los Angeles, and that began to dwindle. So at that time, we decided it was probably, since Bill was now teaching at San Diego State University, and I was at Northern Colorado, that we probably should let the LA Jazz Workshop just not continue anymore. And so that's what we decided at that time. And our school bands wound up sometimes being better than the LA Jazz Workshop bands. So.
Oh man, Bill Yeager. Yeah, he was something.
Yeah, oh my gosh, and he's still going strong. Bill now is directing the Bill Yeager professional band, the jazz orchestra, Bill Yeager Jazz Orchestra in San Diego. He is retired from the San Diego State and is
Uh-huh.
now directing his band out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've been waiting to talk to you about this next question from the moment that I contacted you. Through your work with the Jazz Education Abroad Network organization, you have spread jazz and jazz education around the globe. Share with us some of those most impactful events you've experienced during those years.
Oh boy, let's see. In the late 70s, late 90s, and the early 2000s, I started going to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to Jordan, to Syria, and to all of these different countries. And in these cities that we go to, as an example, we would go into Afghanistan, into Kabul, Afghanistan, and there's a school there called ANIM, which is the Afghan National Institute of Music. And we would go there, and they were teaching students music, and one of the things they were teaching them how to play rock and jazz. So we'd go to this NIM and work with the students there. We had to be really careful at that time in Afghanistan, because if we were in front of a window and somebody saw us playing an instrument, that would not be a very good thing. So we would always be playing or have our ensemble groups in closed rooms and so forth. And I do remember we were over in Herat, which is over in the western part of Afghanistan, and we were playing at sort of a dance kind of a thing, and then we got a very, very strange feeling, and so we decided we should probably leave right now, and so we went back to the army base. We were on the German army base in Herat, and we went to the airport. We called the plane. They asked them to pick us up, and they said, "Well, I'm sorry, the plane's not available anymore. There's no way you can get out of Herat, Afghanistan." So at that time, we made an emergency call to the United Nations, and they flew in a special plane to get us out of Herat back to Kabul, Afghanistan, so where we could then get on another plane and go back to our place. But we found that the common denominator of all the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth, that everybody had a TV set and everybody had a cell phone. So that was the common denominator. So they knew American jazz, they knew American rock, they knew a lot about American music at the time. So when we would want to set up a jazz workshop, there's no way you can advertise something like a jazz workshop. You can't advertise, at that time you couldn't advertise a concert, you couldn't advertise that you were going to have something. So we would go to the towns in these different countries, and each of these countries had what they call a wedding street. So we would go down Wedding Street and let all the wedding people know who knew all the musicians in town. So we would let them know we were having a jazz workshop. And we do that for about 2 days. And then at the jazz workshop, when we had auditions, lo and behold, we'd have maybe 60, 70 people show up. And then we would rehearse, and we would have everything from big bands to small combos to classical orchestras and in some cases choir. But when it came time for the performance, there was no way that we could advertise any performance. We just, through word of mouth, through the musicians that we had met through Wedding Street, we picked up enough of an audience that we had a great audience for that. And I remember In fact, I think it was in Herat that they had a musicians union in Herat. And I remember going in there and they had a small recorder, which was a secret, but it was really great because they had a balcony on the second floor, and you could go out and sit in the balcony and watch the traffic go by and, and so forth. So it was a lot of fun. And everybody that we met was just really, really nice. And we had to have translators, obviously, because of the language barrier. But the translators were always very, very good. And we found that the people all over the world, I mean, they just love American jazz. They love the rock. So when we do a concert, we do a combination of jazz things or rock things and so forth. So that the crowd would respond positively to the musicians, which gave the musicians a really good feeling about what they were doing. And even after we left, after a week or 2 weeks of time, even after we left, many of the things would continue on. So it was a pretty neat situation.
Talk to us a little bit about your current spot, Taipei.
In Taipei, well, I direct the Taipei Jazz Orchestra, and that was again I had been coming to Taipei for almost 25 years prior to this time, because one of my students, Ray Heber, was teaching at Taipei American School. So I would come and do the wind ensemble, or I would come here on my way to do something else. But in Taipei, so I had been in Taipei many times on my way to China or on my way to someplace else. And so about 2010, 2011, I came to Taipei, and I was down at the Chiang Kai-shek area, which has an outdoor auditorium and concert halls and everything else. And I heard this jazz band play, and I thought, wow, that sounds pretty good. So I went to it. It happened to be the Taipei Jazz Orchestra. It was directed by Jimmy Lee, who was a graduate of the University of North Texas. And so the band sounded just really, really great. And so I started coming around, and then they came to be one time that Jimmy asked if I would be interested in directing the band. I said, oh, that would be a great honor. I would consider it as very, very special. And so I wound up directing the Taipei Jazz Orchestra, and we do all kinds of performances still today with everything from, we had a big band madness festival set up for this next weekend after this. And because of COVID-19, we had to make a cancellations here. And so we couldn't continue that. But there are a lot of big bands throughout Taiwan. And there's a Coast Swing Band and Tainan, and as you go throughout the country, I think we had 21 community big bands signed up for the Madness Festival, and that's really great for Taiwan. So the Taiwan Arts Council and the Ministry of Culture they're very, very supportive of music in general, jazz music, orchestral music, and so forth. So we find that it's a really very musical society.
That sounds really special. I know they're
it
is. Now, let's look back a little bit. Both of us have been involved with jazz organizations throughout the year. NAJE, IAJE, and now JAN. How important is it for young directors to get that involvement?
I think it's really, really important. I can remember from IAJE, NAJE to IAJE to JAN and so forth. And I remember going to the conferences. I wouldn't miss a conference because you would learn so much. You had the opportunity to hear other ensembles, and you had a chance to hear literature, which is the key to success of any organization, whether it's a wind ensemble or whether it's a jazz ensemble. You would hear all kinds of literature, And that was really key. They had sight reading sessions. You got to meet, you would go to master classes, and there's so much you can learn from all of those things. It's something that in the new generation that's coming up, they should never miss a Gen Conference because it's really, really important for their future and for the future of their students.
And the future of the music as well.
And future of the business of music, absolutely.
Well, with your global involvement and reach, you're in a very unique position to give us a perspective on where jazz is and what the future of jazz and jazz education hold for all of us.
Yes, in 1997, I wrote a chapter in the book for the National Education Association on what I thought the future of music would be. At that time, I felt that eventually what would happen is that we would have, as an example, say a brass quintet. And we would be in different locations in the United States, and we could still rehearse together. We're not at that place yet, but I think we're going there. I think there's going to be, from what I gather, what I'm hearing, is that maybe the days of going to school and playing in a wind ensemble or playing in a jazz band might have its limitations, but the alternative to that could be the development of computer technology to where your experience might be similar. You will never have that experience for the in-person thing, but I think it's becoming more and more difficult as I'm listening and looking at to what's going on in education in the United States. That more things are online. If you want to study privately now, rather than going down to, if say I was in Renton High School, rather than going to Seattle, I could stay home, get online with Eric Marienthal, and have one of the greatest teachers in the world. So when we have that happening, then what becomes the next step is then that organizations that you would have, that you would combine. We hear so many groups due to COVID-19 where people were doing multiple cam associations, and somebody would mix it down, and the band would sound pretty good. But maybe that might be coming from a live situation. That's a possibility. I envision that. Not saying that I would like that, because I think the rapport, the feedback, and the interaction that you have with the group is something you can't replace. But maybe that might be something that we might be looking at down the line a ways. And I always thought of the idea of holographic figures, in which maybe you could be sitting down and playing next to Miles or something like that. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility. Yeah, because some of the holographic things that they're doing with Michael Jackson now is real. And you're looking at the performance and you're thinking, that's Michael Jackson right there dancing now. Mm-hmm. Well, no, it isn't. It's something, and maybe in education, maybe that might be something that is possible. I think we should be ready for that and find a way in which we can make that work to the benefit of live music.
That's really an interesting perspective. You know, Gene, throughout your career, you've been a trailblazer. What trails are in your future?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. I would say for me, well, number one, I think the key to any organization is literature, and I've always been interested in literature. That's the reason for starting iJazz Music. But I think that that how we're rehearsing groups, I think is I just think the picture is going to change sometime. I see that right now we have jazz programs that are really outstanding throughout the United States. I mean, jazz has never been in such a situation right now, but I think maybe that might change to some type of online or some type of holographic innovation that could allow us to rehearse together in some way, shape, or form. I do see a change in the way things would be. I think jazz festivals are going to be harder and harder to make happen because the people, when we were in Colorado, we on 2 states on either side of Colorado, people would come to join the UNC Greeley Jazz Festival. But I don't see that. I'm not seeing that happen in the future anymore. I think that may change, and there will be something that will replace that and make the change. And it very well could be something dealing with current technology, or the technology that we have now is growing so fast and so rapidly that it might be something that will change, and we'll just say that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Gene, thank you so much for being with us today. This has just been an incredible interview with one of the most important jazz educators ever. I'm a fan of yours. You're a mentor of mine. We love you. God bless you, and be well.
Dick, thank you very much. It was very enjoyable. Thank you, Bob. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Gene. Just an incredible wealth of information you've shared there. To our viewers, thanks for joining us for this Jazz Zone Together interview. Please check out the entire library of interviews. We know you'll find them of real value to your programs. Watch for updates as we're adding new interviews regularly.